All right. Well, kids and students in the room and those watching online, I want to open up today by confessing something to you. I got to be honest with you. Last week, y'all were in Kid Zone, or you were in HSU, you were in MSU, or you weren't paying attention when you were watching church from home with your family. And I just want you to know that we spent all of last Sunday just talking smack about you. We just talked so much smack about you last Sunday. It was great. And we're, again, in the spirit of honesty, we're gonna do the same thing today. We're just gonna talk about you all day today. We're gonna talk about you like you're not even in the room. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be dope. And so what I wanna do is while you're sitting there being offended because we're talking smack about you, I don't want you to be confused about what we're saying and where we've been. So if it's cool with you, I'm just gonna do a quick recap of what we talked about last week so that you're not confused, so that you can be properly offended. So last week, what we talked about is we talked about the fact that if every mature kind of gospel-oriented believer is a full circle, then our job as the older generation, our job is to be circle makers for you, the next generation. That's basically what we talked about. And what we kind of discovered is that if instead of, as the older generation, if we would instead of flailing around wildly and shaking our fists at the things that your generation values and the things that you're passionate about, or at least the applications of the values that you have as part of the next generation, if we would spend less time shaking our fists at that and instead accommodate what we can accommodate, and then leverage that to influence you toward the kingdom, what we found is that might be a better, more fulfilling, less infuriating way to live life for us as the older generations. And so that was kind of what we talked about. We talked about what it would look like because what we realized, and maybe for some of us, this was kind of the first time we've ever really noticed this before, is that while we might be troubled by the applications of the values and passions of your generation, what we really discovered is that the values and passions themselves are actually, there's a lot of kingdom in there. There's a lot of gospel in there, that your generation has made and is making space for the gospel of Jesus Christ. You just don't know it yet. And I think until last week, a lot of us also just didn't realize that yet. And so that's what we've been doing, is recognizing that every generation has the image of God planted in them, that didn't stop with the Gen Xers or the baby boomers or the millennials, but that God has been faithful in planting his image inside every generation. And so all we have to do is look for those characteristics, look for those traits that have a straight path toward the kingdom, and then start to leverage those accommodations to influence you toward kingdom work. And that's what we discovered. That's what we talked about last week. And I recognize that for the adults in the room, for us, it's still a little uncomfortable, isn't it? Because the thing is, what we're worried about is for our generation, whatever our is, not my generation, but me, Gen X, baby boomer, the one before that. Like, if for our generation, I don't know what it's called, but for our generation, like we have our idea of what a circle is, right? This is what a circle, a fully mature, gospel-oriented believer looks like. And we're just afraid that the next generation is gonna miss some parts of the circle that we think are important. We're afraid that the next generation there's some things that our generation has valued, and we think those things are important, and we're afraid that the next generation is gonna miss it. We don't want them to miss it. And I get that, I do. I really do, I get that. But I want to continue to help us to see this differently. So, had a plan, recalculating. Okay, I need three kids or students to come on stage to help me with something. Can I get 3 kids or students? Is that gonna be a possibility? Can we have it? Raise it. Okay, we got a hand in the back. Okay, we got one right there. That's perfect. Yep, right there. Sean, come on. Yep, got one. I need one more. Kid or student. At least 5 would be good. All right, let me get you in the dress right there in the back. Yeah, you come on stage. And this is Sierra and Miss Kathy over there. They're gonna help you guys come on stage. You just follow them right over to this side. That's perfect. Yep. You guys come on stage, okay. All right. Yep, good hustle. Good hustle, Sean. No. All right, great. Come on, it's too late. Okay. All right. All right, we got the third one coming. Okay, here's the deal. Here's what I need from you, okay? I am going to start a shape, okay? I'm gonna tell you what the shape is. I'm not gonna keep you guessing, okay? I'm gonna start a shape, and all I need you to do is complete the shape. We're gonna complete it nice and big so that everyone out there, everyone watching online can see, okay? I'm gonna start a shape with my finger, I'll start the shape, and you're just gonna complete it, okay? Does that sound good? We do that? All right, dope. All right, who's going first? Y'all want rock, paper, scissors for it, or what's going on? Who wants to go first? Sean does, he's so excited. Oh, okay, go ahead. No, rock, paper, scissors for it. But Sean, no, hold on, face the correct, because I want them to see this. All right, place your bets. Okay, here we go, no, just kidding. All right, here we go. All right, ready, set, rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Y'all, come on, rock, paper, scissors, shoot. You're going first. All right, come on. Okay. All right, are you ready? All right, I'm gonna draw a triangle. You ready? You complete the circle. Nope, start, come over here. Yep, start with my finger, complete it. Okay, good. Triangle, did we see it? All right, give it up for her. All right, awesome. Do y'all wanna do this one more time?
Fine, one more time.
Okay, come on, let's figure it out, come on. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. I'm sick of it. All right, so, come on. All right, here we go. This is gonna be a square, okay? All right, so you come right here, you're gonna complete it, okay? Perfect, spot on, give it up for him. All right, Sean, come on, man, let's do it. This is gonna be a circle, okay? You ready? Whoa, that's a big circle. Give it up for him. All right, thank you. You guys can have a seat. Right, yep. Go around the piano. Yep, right in the front or back. That's great. Yep, that's good. All right, you guys go have a seat. Listen, y'all notice how they did that? Y'all notice that? I said complete the shape. Particularly the circle is what we're paying attention to. Y'all notice I said complete the circle. Y'all notice what Sean did? I drew a segment right here. Sean started from the end of the segment and went and completed the circle. You know why? This is something that we've all known since we were children. And that's that the worst possible way to complete a circle is to start on the opposite side of the segment and start trying to fill it in according to what you think it should look. That's the worst way to complete a circle. It's like the only bad way to do it. Right? And so here's the thing. I get it for us as the older generations, what we want it so bad, right? We want their circles to have the pieces over here that we think are important. I get that. Some of it probably is important. They probably should have those pieces. But the best way, if we want to be circle makers for the next generation, and we do, right? The best way to complete a circle is to start where the segment ends. And what we discovered last week is that if we want to be circle makers for the next generation, then we have to admit to ourselves that part of the segment is already there. So I know that we're afraid they're gonna miss it. I'm afraid too, I get that, I totally get that. But our job is to take the segment where it is, and as disciple makers, we start kind of walking them along the path of completing the circle from there. Right? Instead of starting over here with the part of the circle that we think is most important, we start in the place because, and this is what we discovered last week, and we're gonna dig into it a little bit deeper today, because the part of the circle that the next generation values most matters. It maybe doesn't matter as much to you, but it matters a whole lot to the world that the next generation has to navigate as followers of Jesus. So don't downplay their part of the circle, it matters. In fact, not only don't downplay it, but again, as we discovered last week, accommodate what you can accommodate and then leverage that to influence them toward completing the circle, toward kingdom work. And that is exactly what the Apostle Paul did. And that's what we talked about last week in Acts chapter 17. So if you have a Bible, that's where we're headed. We're headed back to Acts chapter 17 because that's what Paul did with the Athenians. When Paul showed up on the scene with the Athenians, he saw what he saw. He was deeply troubled by some of the stuff he saw in their culture, but he accommodated what he could accommodate, and he pointed them toward the kingdom, found a straight line toward the kingdom. And that's what Paul did last week. So we want to pick it up. We didn't read all of Paul's sermon to the Athenian philosophers, philosophers last week, right? He stood before the council. He started preaching the gospel to them because they wanted to hear a little bit more. And so we didn't read all of that sermon, but he did preach, and he laid out the gospel for them. He did this amazing thing where he connected the dots for them on their values and passions and where they can find the fullness of that in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that was the sermon that he preached for them. And here is what happened next. We're in Acts 17, starting in verse 32. When they, the Athenians, when they heard Paul speak about the resurrection of the dead, some laughed in contempt. You know what I love about the Bible? The thing I love about the Bible is that God didn't choose to take out the things that made him or his people look bad. You know, like the Bible isn't whitewashed, right? It's not this whitewashed document that's like only makes people, like you would think that if the Bible was just a bunch of people, if it was and it would have to be the greatest conspiracy in the world, like the greatest lie ever, composed by 40 authors over the course of hundreds upon hundreds of years. They were all part of a secret society that banded together and said, let's write one continuous story about the redemption of the world and we'll fool everybody. It'll be dope, right? Like, let's say that happened, okay? You would think that stuff like what we just read wouldn't be in there because that makes the Apostle Paul look bad. But Luke didn't do that. Luke didn't whitewash the story. Right? Luke, the dude who wrote Acts, right? He just wrote what happened. And what happened was Paul went before the Athenian philosophers and he said, hey, this is what, troubling applications. But listen, the values themselves are good. Let me point you in the direction toward the kingdom where you'll find the fullness of what it is you're searching for, the death and the resurrection, belief in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And they laughed at him. At least some of them did. You know what happened? Paul got clapbacked, right? Y'all were here last week? Paul got clapbacked. That's what happened, right? Paul said, hey, Athenians, Jesus is the real deal. And the reason we know he's the real deal is because he died and then he rose from the dead. And the Athenians were like, ha, your mama died and rose from the dead, right? And Paul, and it was bad, right? They clapped, he got clapbacked. It was bad. It was a bad moment for Paul. And Luke wrote it down because that's what happened. That's what happened. Apologetically, I just think that's interesting. Anyway, so that's what happened. So we're still going in, no. Here's the application of that, okay? So that's just like a human being thing. Like some people aren't gonna hear it, right? You share the gospel with people, some people, they're just not gonna hear it. Their heart isn't in a place to receive the gospel. They just ain't gonna hear it. And that's not a generational thing. That's like a human being thing, And so I'm just saying that to say don't be surprised or don't be prejudiced against the next generation if the next gen kid or young adult that you're investing in, even after being exposed to not just churchianity, but the gospel of Jesus Christ, don't be surprised, shocked, angry, upset, or prejudiced against the next generation if that next gen kid rejects the gospel. That's not a Gen Z thing. That's not a Gen Alpha thing. It's not even like millennials don't even have like the monopoly on that. That's just like a human being thing, right? Some people are just gonna laugh in contempt. You're gonna get clapbacks. That's gonna happen every once in a while. So that's what happened, right? So verse 32, still in verse 32. Some laughed in contempt, but others said, we want to hear more about this later. That ended Paul's discussion with them. But some joined him and became believers. Among them were Dionysius, a member of the council, a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So while many members of that foreign culture straight up rejected the gospel, right, the message that Paul was sharing with them, there were others who were present, and they didn't reject it. They had to sit with it for a while, right? They were kind of like, oh, I'll have to hear more about this later. That's enough for now, but man, I'll hear more about this, right? They were just curious. They just kind of needed to sit with it for a little while, right? And Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting that some people didn't reject it outright. They just had to kind of hear about it a little while. Here's what I mean by that. So my men's group, we were just talking about this last week. We were having a conversation about this very thing. Tuesday night, I'm sitting in my men's group and we're having a conversation about this very thing. The fact that life is long. Life is long. I know that the saying is life is short, and that's true, but it's also true that life is long, isn't it? Like, life is long, and there are lots of different seasons, and so while life is long, it's also true that the process of the gospel taking root in someone's life, in their heart, right? Sometimes that's long. It takes a while. And that's true of you too. How many years did you spend skating on the surface of Christianity, just kind of doing the churchianity thing before you fully embrace the fact that there is more? Right? That there's something to happen in your heart at like a heart level because of the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? How long did you just skate on the surface of, oh, I believe in God, and then I'm going to try to do the right thing without realizing that there's more? Sometimes it's just a process. Life is long. And so don't be distraught if the person that you're walking with, the generation that you're trying to influence in one area or another, maybe it's at your job, or maybe it's in the neighborhood, or maybe it's you got kids and their friends are over at your house all the time and you're kind of trying to slowly, right? Don't like be angry or don't be distraught if it just seems like it's taken a while, because life is long. And we see it here with Paul and the Athenians, and we see it in our own lives too. Sometimes it just takes a while for the gospel to take root, and that's okay. So don't be distraught. It's okay. Paul experienced that, and we experience it too. And I'm going to make a statement, and we're going to talk more about it in a couple minutes. But the thing that we have to keep in mind when we're discipling the next generation is we have to keep in mind that even if it doesn't feel like it's going the way we want it to go, we can trust that God is going to do his work in their hearts with the gospel, because we can trust God with his own kingdom. We can trust God with it. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, but first I want to talk about some other stuff. So we'll come back to that in a minute. There is a third group. There's a third group that Luke mentions here, because yes, Luke mentions the group that straight up rejected the gospel, and then there's also the group that were like, yeah, we just need to chew on it some more. We'll come back to this later. But there's a third group that Luke mentions, and that's the group of believers, right? That's Dionysus and that's Damaris. And here's the deal: we don't know a ton about Damaris. We really just don't know a lot about her, okay? We know that she was a believer and that she was one of the first believers in Athens, and that's great. But outside of that, history doesn't tell us a whole lot about Damaris. We just don't know a lot about her. But I think when we look at what happened with Dionysus, I think that gives us our cue on what comes next after accommodate and influence, because there is a third step in influencing and interacting with the next generation to do kingdom work, right? Joining arms to do kingdom work. There is a third step. It's accommodate, it's influence, and then Paul shows us a third step because what the Bible doesn't tell us, but history does, is that Dionysus went on to be the first bishop of the church of Athens. That this dude who became a believer because of Paul's sermon and Paul's accommodating and influencing, and then Dionysus winds up being empowered to be the first bishop of the church of Athens. And that's what history tells us. And so I think the third step for us is empower. But before we get to what that has to do with us, let me talk a little bit about Dionysus, okay? Dionysus was a member of the Areopagus, okay? Which means that he was all about his job, a huge part of his life, a huge part of his passion, his values, right? What he thought was most important is he sat on the judiciary council of Athens to kind of help enforce their laws, to help form new laws, to kind of explore philosophy, because the Athenians were all about philosophy, right? And so he was part of that group that was all about law and legislature and in the judicial branch and the legislative branch of that Athenian culture. That's what Dionysus was all about, okay? And he became the first bishop of the church of Athens. Now, what I'm about to say next, I'm going to be honest, just continue in the spirit of honesty. I'm not like This isn't something that I'm like 100% certain about. I'm really not. I don't think I can be because the Bible doesn't tell us this. Maybe history does, but honestly, I probably just haven't done enough research to find out. Maybe some of y'all know. But I'm gonna take a really good, I think it's a really educated guess that this is what happened next. And the reason I think based on what we know about Dionysus and about Paul and about the situation at the Athenian church, I'm willing to guess that Dionysus didn't lead the church of Athens the way Paul would have. I'm willing to, I think it's a good educated guess that Dionysus didn't lead the Athenian church the way Peter would have. I think based on knowing what we know about Dionysus' background, knowing what we know about his profession, knowing what we know about the Athenian culture that he was leading a church in and navigating, knowing what we know about the fact that Paul, as far as we know, never went back and visited Athens after this trip. He never returned there to check up on this church. Knowing what we know that Paul never wrote any letters to this church after that. Knowing that Dionysus wasn't leading this church according to the New Testament because there was no New Testament yet, knowing what we know, I just would guess that the Athenian church was a little quirky. I would guess that it had some bents to it. It had some kind of weird stuff going on in there that was maybe a little different than what Paul would have necessarily wanted for that church. Dionysus had his quirks, right? He had his bents. In fact, if you were to Google, and some of you know way more about Dionysus than I do. I can tell you that much right now. And if you were to Google Dionysus, what you would discover is that what he is venerated for, what he's respected for as a saint, is he's respected as like the saint who protects, like the protector of the judiciary, protector of the judiciary and the laws. That's what he's known for, protector of the judiciary and the judges. He's the saint of the protector of the like that's what he's known for as a saint. That's his religious legacy. That's weird. That's like weird to me. It's weird. I can almost guarantee that would not have been what Paul would have said. Hey, here's what's most important. This is the part of the circle that's most important. Protect the judiciary, right? Like that, I don't think that would have been Paul's, like his bent, his focus, what would have been most important in Paul's circle, but that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened because Paul accommodated, influenced, and empowered Dionysus to lead, to do kingdom work, and that's exactly what Dionysus did. He did kingdom work according to the things he brought his love, his passions, and his values, and he brought kingdom into that arena of life. And that's how Dionysus lived. And now we remember him as the saint who was the protector of the judiciary and the judges. And I don't know for sure, but I think the Athenian church probably had some parts of the circle that were a little wonky, right? A little weird. And yet God's kingdom continued to reign. God's kingdom the gospel was continued to be established in Greece, in Athens, in that European part of the world. The world did not come crashing down because the Athenian church, led by Dionysus, No, Paul empowered Dionysus, and God continued to establish his kingdom despite Dionysus's. Guarantee the dude had flaws, guarantee the dude had quirks. By the way, here's the reason I know this, because I know some of y'all are still a little skeptical. You're like, oh, you're getting extra biblical on us. No, I get that. But here's how I know. The reason I know that the Athenian church probably had some quirks and some flaws is because the vast majority of what we read in the New Testament is because Paul empowered some people to lead churches in places, and then as those church leaders were trying to help the church navigate some things, they were being influenced by the values and passions, or at least the applications of the values and passions of the culture that they were trying to navigate. And it was throwing some things off in regard to their theology and the application of their theology. And so Paul had to write these letters. That's why we have the New Testament. So no, we don't have a letter that Paul wrote to the Athenians, but I'm pretty sure there would have been one. There might have been one, or there might have been a need for one, because that's what happened with most of the churches that Paul planted. He had to write them some letters to go visit them and be like, hey, no, this, right? He had to do that with them a little bit. Okay, so empower. Empower is the third step. I just think when you look at what happened with the Church of Athens and how that narrative kind of shaped out and what Paul was able to do to influence them, there weren't like a lot of it wasn't, honestly, it like wasn't Paul's most successful like missionary venture, right? Like numbers wise, like we're talking about like influencing people toward the kingdom, numbers, like it like wasn't that successful. But I do think it was really important and really important for us as we're navigating influencing the next generation. So if we can take a step away from Paul and Dionysus and that stuff, if we can take a step away from that for a couple minutes, I want to share why I think there has never been a better generation to empower than Gen Z and Gen Alpha after them. Let me tell you why. Let me give you a couple reasons. If there's one thing that Gen Z is known for, and Alpha too, but Gen Z for sure, is a sense of an individualism. That there is this sense there is this heightened sense of self-awareness and this is who I am, right? Everything is fluid because you're a unique person, right? And there's in all of the applications, a lot of the applications of that generational trait, troubling, right? Troubling, but that sense of individualism, or at least the self-awareness, the heightened sense of self-awareness that comes with it, there are some kingdom qualities there. And it makes them a really good generation to empower. You know why? Because when you are dealing with a generation that has a heightened sense of self-awareness, that means that they are able to discover how God has uniquely wired them and start walking in those giftings earlier than most of us were able to. Because they're in here. They're all up in here and in here about who am I, what am I gifted, what is my purpose, right? That's Gen Z. They're all about that. That's good. We may be troubled by some of the application points of some of that, self-awareness and identity. We might be, I get that, I'm troubled by it too, but that's a good thing. It makes us a really good generation to invest in because of their unique wiring, they can do more for the kingdom in their lifetime than you and I could. Because they can get started younger. Because they have the self-awareness. And they're all up in here and they're trying to figure out at a much earlier age than most of us were in our generations were. They're trying to figure out who am I and how has God wired me. They are searching for it. We can leverage that. There's some space in the kingdom for that. Let me give you another reason why Gen Z is a phenomenal generation to invest in. They're a phenomenal generation to invest in because they are almost, uniquely, they have this privilege. It's ironic, actually, to use that word, but it's true. They are uniquely privileged to be able to focus on like their heart and on like emotional health and like their purpose and all that. They're like kind of uniquely privileged to be able to do that. Because in the generations before, there maybe wasn't as much of there wasn't an ability to focus on as much of that. So we're gonna stop ignoring you now. This is to the next generation who is sitting in the room or watching online, okay? Let me talk to you for a couple minutes. Your ability to be all up in your feelings about all kinds of things, your ability to discover your purpose at a young age and start to live out some of that at such a young age, you owe that to the baby boomers. You owe that to the baby boomers and the greatest generation, right? You owe because they put their lives and their dreams on hold and their livelihoods and their lives on the line to make sure that America was a safe place to live. You get to be privileged enough to chase after your dreams because some of them didn't. And in fact, a lot of them didn't. Instead, they worked hard, they sweated, they grind, they did whatever they had to do so that so that the future generations would be able to focus on living out your dreams. You owe that to the baby boomers and the greatest generation. Like your love for creativity and expressing yourself, you owe that to Gen X and the technology that's allowed you a platform to express those things. You owe that to Gen X because of their intelligence and because of their creativity and because of their self-expression and pushing against some of the barriers of society. You owe a lot of what you get to enjoy to Gen X. You are privileged enough to enjoy that because of the generations that have come before you. You owe particularly in the arena of technology, self-expression, and I am a unique person with a voice, you owe that to my generation. The millennials, because the vast majority of the platforms that allow you to launch your brand, to expand your business, to launch a nonprofit, to have a voice at 13 years old, you owe that to my generation because the vast majority of those platforms were built by or for my generation. You're welcome. So listen, the reason that Gen Z, Gen Alpha, the reason that you get to be triggered all the time is because the generations that came before you didn't have the time to be. And they persevered through that, and they built, and they sacrificed, and they worked hard so that you could have the privilege of being all up in your feelings about some stuff. So you thank an old person the next time you see one. Because and for the older generation, for us, for me and everybody older than me, which is like everybody basically, for the older generations, do you see why there has never been a better generation to invest in? There's never been a better generation to invest in because we built this generation. Everything that they get to enjoy and pursue and achieve and be in their heart about and discover we built this for them. Why wouldn't we want to invest in them? Why wouldn't we want to empower them to do more in their lifetimes than we could in ours? Why wouldn't we? We built this for them. So let's be people who don't just build it for them and then shake our fists. Let's continue to invest in them and see what good is in them so that we can help them build the future. All right, back to Dionysus, back to Paul, back to that stuff, the Bible, real quick. And then we'll close. Here's the thing that I think Paul recognized, and I think it would be helpful for us to recognize it too, okay? There are going to be some things about the circle that we think are important that the next generation or the influent generation we're trying to influence, they're going to miss. They're going to miss it. They're going to miss it. But we can still empower them anyway. Even if we feel a little bit, we're a little concerned about some things, that's okay. I still think we can empower them. I think we can empower them because when you accommodate what you can accommodate, and this is the most important part to me, is influence them toward being gospel-oriented. When they're oriented around the gospel, that's their primary orientation, is around the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? Then the magnetic pull of the gospel, even if their circle is going, it's going up here, if the gospel's at the center, it's gonna come back. It's gonna come around. You know why I know that? I know that because that's what Paul told me. That's what Paul says in Philippians 1:6. He said, he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion. That's what the Bible say. So we don't have to be look, I get the line segment, it's floating up here and you're like, right. But here's the thing. Once you have them oriented around the gospel, you don't have to be that concerned with the direction of the segment. The segment can be going in a certain direction, but as long as it's headed toward the right destination, it's going to get there. It is the destination, not the direction of the segment, that determines whether or not we should be worried. If the segment's headed in the wrong destination, we should be worried. But if it's headed toward gospel-oriented, kingdom-minded stuff, even if it's floating up here and we think it should be down here or over here somewhere, and it's up here, right? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, but you can kick it in the direction it's already floating, and the gospel, the Holy Spirit within them is going to take care of it because life is long and God can be trusted with his kingdom. So here's the point. If you want to be a circle maker for the next generation, push the segment in the direction it's already floating. And when I say the segment, I'm not talking about the applications of some of the applications are troubling. I'm not saying kick it further into that troubling direction, but there is a value and a passion behind the application of it that is kingdom oriented. Kick the segment in that direction, walk the segment in that direction, and then watch. You get to sit back and watch. Or maybe you get to patiently walk with them, but you get to sit back and watch God do his thing. Because God can be trusted with his own kingdom. Accommodate, influence, empower. There are some troubling things about the applications of the values of the next generation. I agree with you. I think if we would keep those three things in mind, like Paul did, I think that we would discover that we're able to be more effective for the kingdom for the duration of our lifetime. We won't spend the last 30 or 40 or 20 years of our lives just angry with where the world is going. We can continue to link arms for the long haul until God calls us home. I was thinking about this morning, and you know why we can trust God with his kingdom? We can trust God with his kingdom because he's been doing this a long time. This isn't new to him. I know it's new to us, and it feels really new to us, and it feels really scary to us, and I get that, but if you're like a churchy person, like, you know that God has been redirecting, God has been righting the ship of his people for a very long time. That's what the Old Testament is. It's God's people being and then they kind of get a little wonky over here for a little while, and it's like that for a little while, and then God brings them to a place of repentance, and the circle continues, and then they get off track a little, and then God brings them to a place of repentance in the circle, and then they get, right? That's the Old Testament over and over and over and over again until God brought about Jesus and launched the new covenant and launched the church and continued that cycle with his people throughout the early church history and beyond. We can trust God with his kingdom. We don't have to freak out because of the applications of the values and the passions of the next generation, because God has got this. He can be trusted with his kingdom. And we, all of us, just get to enjoy the privilege of taking our part in it, of accommodating, of influencing, and empowering. I hope we'll be a church who does that for the next generation. I hope that our legacy will live on through them as they do their part of the circle, the things that matter most to them that we maybe wouldn't include, but they think it's important, and it's important to the world that they're navigating. I pray that we would be a people who could appreciate that. I just think that's a better way to live. Let me pray. God, thank you for being a God who patiently walks with us when we get off track. We got all kinds of things going on in our lives, just individually in our lives and in our hearts that are a little wonky, they're a little off, they're just not quite, but you still walk with us patiently. You walk us along the path of sanctification and make us more like Jesus through this messy, messy process. I pray that we would be a people who reflect that kind of love and patience to the next generation, that we would walk with them patiently as they go through the process of becoming fully mature, gospel-oriented followers of Jesus. Lord, give us the wisdom to know the words to speak when we do have to have the hard conversations about the applications, and give us the patience and restraint and wisdom to hold back and to encourage them in the areas that are ripe for kingdom transformation. We trust you with their kingdom, Lord. It's in Jesus' name I pray.